So how do we get this mind? How do we get this mind of emptying? Okay. So what I was very interested in this, and so I wanted to go look up the word kenosis. So when I look up the word kenosis, see that the Greek word kanao, and of course ekenosis is the conjugation that we see in Philippians 2:7. The Greek word kanao, in the context of the First Roman Empire, particularly among Greek-speaking populations, would have been understood primarily as to empty or to make empty. The term appears in various contexts across Greek literature, encompassing both literal and metaphorical uses. The literal use, in a straightforward literal sense, kanao, could refer to the act of emptying a container or a space of its contents. This could apply to everyday activities, such as emptying a vessel of water or clearing a room. Metaphorical use, kanao, was used in philosophical and rhetorical contexts to mean to make void, to nullify. Now, to make void could also be an empty, like an open space, a void space, or to make of no effect. This usage could be applied to abstract concepts, such as negating the power or value of something. In early Christian texts, now this is where, when Christians start writing and making rules and reducing everything to these statements that they have, that's when we start introducing what you might call pollution into the information ecology on these things. I'll talk more about that when we look at the next slide. So in early Christian texts, which are a significant source for understanding Greek usage in the first century due to the New Testament being written in Koine Greek, kanao takes on a special theological meanings. For example, the Epistle of the Philippians in Christian New Testament, Paul uses kanao in a famous passage describing Jesus' incarnation. He emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Here, kanao is interpreted as he emptied himself, suggesting a voluntary renunciation or setting aside of equality with God to assume human form. This theological use would have been understood, and I think that whole construct of giving up his divine attributes, all this kind of stuff, I think that is a incorrect, because it's an artifact of propositional reductivity. I think there's something else going on there. Something more like what Paul is doing, something more like what each one of us can do. So you don't operate based on what you're connected to. Like I have this book right up here which shows my lineage and heritage and all that, and I am the 40th generation of ordained Baptist preachers and all that. And I could be attached to all that. I could be egoically attached to all that, or I could have a kenosis of it. Let all that go, just like Paul did in Philippians chapter 3. All that, Israelite, Jewish, Pharisee, Benjamin heritage that he had, let it all go, count it all as dung, that I may win Christ. Okay? So we have all kinds of things we're attached to like this. So he emptied himself, suggesting voluntary renunciation or setting aside of equality with God to assume human form. This theological use would have been understood when the Christian communities of the Roman Empire as a profound act of humility and self-limitation. However, for the broader Greek-speaking, so I also disagree with the self-limitation. I actually think you increase in the amount that you can voluntarily adopt responsibility when you connote. We're going to make a new verb, connote, when you connote, when you have kenosis. For the broader Greek-speaking world unfamiliar with Christian theology, the use of kanao would align more with its common literary and philosophical meanings. Now, that's what I want to get at. Thus, first century understanding of kanao would depend on the context, whether in everyday philosophical, rhetorical, or emerging Christian theological discourse. As soon as post-apostolic Christians got a hold of words, we just made a mess of them, okay? And it's the Christian attempt to reduce Christianity, take it away from being the way, the truth, and the life, and reduce it to a set of beliefs, a set of affirmations, like fact claims that are supposed to be affirmed, okay? It's propositionally reductive kind of thing. That constitutes a great deal of pollution in the information ecology. And so when I'm doing study, and I recommend this for you too, when I'm doing study, I really try to steer clear of what Christians said about a particular thing. Because a lot of what they're saying is an introduction of pollution into the information ecology. I want to know, when Paul uses the word, what would he expect that audience to understand when he uses a word or a phrase or a concept, employs a concept, or makes an allusion to something? What would he expect that audience to understand that hasn't been theologically prepared to understand it properly in the way, a denominationally embedded leader might think of it today, properly, orthodox, all that nonsense? Okay. So how do we get the raw first taste, if we will? The raw first taste of what Paul meant when he said something. That's what I'm interested in. So when I conduct study, that's what I'm aiming for. I'm aiming, like, what is that? Like, what did Paul mean when he used the word election? What did Paul mean when he used the word predestination? And so I try to steer clear of this idea of having doctrines of these things, like a doctrine of the rapture, a doctrine of predestination. No. Those are concepts. And more than that, they're just words that were employed by the authors of the Bible in service to an overall point. And the point is, what is that point? Okay. So what I want to get to, interesting, when Paul mentions, he says in Acts 17, even as your own poets say. So Paul refers to their own poets. I have this thing in my head, and when I say things like this, you have to understand, if you're watching this channel, I do not present myself as a Bible teacher or pastor or anything like that, okay? I present myself as a guy sharing his perspective. And you could, instead of thinking of me as presenting some kind of Christian type stuff that you might hear at a church, just think of maybe having dinner or coffee with a friend and you're just talking. It's more like that, okay? So when I start explaining what I'm thinking, I'm not trying to teach anybody what I'm thinking or require that you have to agree with it in order to be right or orthodox or something like that. It's nothing like that at all. So I really want to get into how the words were used in the first century and what they might think. I feel like I was about to say something else. But so to explore the pre-Christian understanding of Kanao, you look at like John is using the word logos. Well, who made the word logos? So, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say this. In my mind, now that I'm not teaching it and just sharing its perspective, just as Christ is the fulfillment of the Jewish Old Testament, I speculate that he is also the fulfillment of whatever the Greek philosophers had going for them. And just like the Jews were apostate by the time Jesus showed up, yeah, maybe the Greek philosophers were too. And over in the East, I suspect, the wise men who came to Jesus' birth came from the East. I suspect, and I can't prove this, but perhaps the order of Melchizedek. Jesus is the way, and he's after the order of Melchizedek. I suspect that something that wound up as Taoism maybe started with Melchizedek. Okay? And whatever is good and salvageable and not apostate about that, I'm not saying there isn't anything that's apostate. Sure there is, whatever. But what I'm saying is that whatever is good and salvageable and actually started off with Melchizedek, Christ is the fulfillment of that. Okay? So I'm not saying that all religions lead to God. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that all religions lead to salvation. What I'm saying is that Jesus of Nazareth is the embodied fulfillment of all Acts 17, all these people that they might, happily, if they might feel after God. That's a record of, the Greek philosophers, the Taoists, they're all feeling after God. And Jesus Christ is the way. He is the answer to all that. He is the answer to the wise men from the east. Where did they come from? How did they know? You ever think about that? How did the wise men know to look for a star and come to see him which is born King of the Jews? How do they know to look for that? There's somebody over there that knows something. And Jesus of Nazareth is the fulfillment of it. And those wise men knew that. Okay? Maybe they got it from Daniel. Maybe it's left over from Melchizedek. I don't know. I tried to look up the connection to them and Melchizedek, and I got got a really weird, interesting cult religion that I'd never heard of before in my life. Honestly. But Jesus is the fulfillment of these things, as far as I can tell. So anyway, I'm always interested in how these things showed up, what they would have thought in the first century before we Christians got our grimy little nasty propositionally reductive fingers on them and corrupted and polluted everything the New Testament has to say. That's how I see church history. I see church history as a corruption and a pollution of everything that Scripture was trying to deliver to us, which could have been great if we would just, read it